So, this is a brief video on interfaith organizing. It's not often when you are engaged in community organizing that you are only working with other Christians. Usually you are going to work with different secular groups, which have people of all different religious backgrounds, traditions, and affiliations in them. So you have a broad-based, what they call a broad-based coalition, which has people of faith and people of different faiths and people without faith. Or you are working in a specifically interfaith coalition. So there are clearly some differences to how you work in an interfaith context than how you work if it's only Christians that are working together. So I'd like to talk about that, referring to what the reading that you read this week from Piles, but I want to also go beyond that. So Piles first talks about what the commonalities are between the impact of people coming from different religious traditions. So she talks specifically about a number of religious traditions, like what do Jews bring to organizing, what do Hindus, what does Gandhi in particular bring to organizing, what do people who come from different kinds of modern spiritualities bring to organizing. So she goes through each of the specifics. So if you're talking about faith-rooted organizing as drawing from the wells, the very specific and deep wells of our faith, that's true, just as true that Jews can do faith-rooted organizing just as well as Christians can. They're just drawing from some similar and some different wells. So if you're coming together with people that are coming from different faiths, but they're each doing faith-rooted organizing, why come together at all? What do you have in common? Well, the why come together at all question partly has to do with how you combine your forces in order to win. Right? That obviously you have a broader coalition, you have more power to move social change. But why particularly, what is the common ground? What is the common sacred ground that you would have with people from other faiths? And she would list these, Piles would list these as, first of all, the legitimation of moral foundation. That I remember working to organize a Jewish political leader, and we had rabbis in the room who were praying, and that was extremely impactful for him, that he began to talk about Torah, that it reminded him of the core moral pillars of his faith. So faith-rooted organizing really speaks to this question of the moral foundations of our actions, because I don't care what your role is in society, if you are a businessman, business leader, if you are a political leader, if you are also a person of faith, that faith is going to and should influence your decisions. So this legitimation of a moral foundation to public decisions is a critical role that all faith communities can play in the organizing process. Secondly, self-discipline and self-sacrifice. When you work for God, you don't work in the same way as when you work for yourself. Maybe when you work for yourself, if you're just working for yourself. Some people are pretty passionate about working for themselves. But if you're working on issues that may not impact you directly, what is going to create a level of self-discipline and self-sacrifice as you work on those issues? Well, faith certainly does that. That you pour your whole heart into the work that you're doing if you're doing it unto the Lord. The third contribution that is in common across different religions is resources. That religious communities and institutions bring funding, bring infrastructure, bring communication channels, and bring leadership training and experience. That if people have been leading in their local congregation, they're much more likely to be able to lead in a public campaign. They've already learned some public speaking skills, they've learned some running a meeting skills, they've learned a number of different things, they've gained some confidence. All of that you bring if you're part of a religious congregation. And then there is this potential for coming together on common sacred ground. So Piles talks about bonding capital and bridging capital. Those are sociological terms. Bonding capital has to do with the way that people can collaborate more easily when they have something in common. So, for all members of the evangelical church, there is a commitment that there is a connection, there's a connection between us that crosses over our political affiliations, and can help us to come together across those affiliations. Crosses also over race, crosses over Gender crosses over multiple divisions. So you can come together with people who are similar to you, and there's a glue that will hold you together. When you are also different from each other, but you have something in common, that brings with it the capital of bridging. So bonding is what connects you together if you have something in common. Bridging is what connects people together who don't have much in common but have one thing that matters. And so when you come together in an interfaith coalition, you have many differences, and they are significant differences, but you may have something in common in terms of your values and beliefs that will bring you together, that will bond you and bridge you. So these are contributions that are now widely recognized by secular institutions. So the World Bank has done some serious research around this. There are a number of scholars who recognize that people of faith have something really unique and powerful to bring to the process of community organizing. But how do we work together given our different faith commitments? There's two core ways, very different ways of working together. The most common way is what I call the lowest common denominator, which is that you come together only on the basis of what you have in common. And so that means you might have a common value. You may all care about families, for example. You may all care about children. You may all have a common sense of justice, particularly if you're talking about the Abrahamic traditions. You come together around your values and you leave out your specific faith practices. Or you might incorporate your specific faith practices, but in a very generic way. So somebody leads a common prayer, but you have to take everything out of that prayer that's specifically Christian, everything that's specifically Jewish, anything that's specifically Muslim. So it's an extremely bland prayer. And you will hear a lot of those extremely bland prayers because they're trying to make sure that everybody can join in the prayer if you're in some kind of public context and working on organizing. When I was running Clue, we developed a very different way of doing interfaith collaboration that we called Rainbow, which said that our greatest gifts actually come out of our particularities, come out of not only our values, but our specific beliefs and practices. And so we tried to work on ways where each group could bring its own faith without compromising your own faith, but in a way that did not negate or condemn the faith of other people. So that was always the balancing act. But we found it to be extraordinarily powerful. It wasn't bland, it was powerful. And I'm going to give you an example. I'll tell you a story. So we were supporting security workers. So security workers, security guards in Los Angeles County at the time that we were doing this were primarily African American. And they were primarily hired by guard companies. And these guard companies then had contracts with commercial building owners. So these commercial building owners would have a number of properties and they would hire a guard company to guard those properties. The problem is that they would do a process called, the lowest bid. So the guard company that came in cheapest would be the one to get the contract. But of course, if you think about it, if you have a very low bid, it means you can't pay your workers very well. You can't give your workers any kind of health benefits. And that means that you have very high turnover because people really don't stay in a job as dangerous as security for very long when they realize that there's very low pay and no health benefits, so that if you get hurt, you're sort of on your own, except for the most basic sort of state provisions. So they don't stay. And if they don't stay, then it's not worth it financially for the company to train them. So you have people providing security for these large office buildings that don't know what they're doing, either to protect themselves or anybody else. So the security officers wanted to organize a union, but of course it didn't help to organize a union within the guard companies because the guard companies could still only get the contracts if they had the lowest bid. So it was useless. It was blood from a turnip, right? That's the phrase. So the union came to us as Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice and said, is there a way that you can influence the building owners to follow a practice called responsible contract bidding. And that means that you put a floor, that you don't accept bids below that floor. You can accept bids at that floor or above, and that floor is enough money to make sure that your workers can have a living wage and some kind of health benefits, and therefore so that there won't be such high turnover, so that people are well trained. So that's the goal, to get the building owners and association to voluntarily accept the practice of responsible contractor bidding. And they asked us if we could do that, if we could influence them in that way. So the largest, the building owner who had the most property in Southern California turned out to be an observant Jew. So we mobilized some rabbis, and the rabbis tried to get a meeting with him to talk to him about why this was an important component of Jewish faith, to make sure that you treated your workers well. And he agreed to meet with them, but then he canceled every meeting, which we understood later is something called in that field the slow no, that you just keep canceling and postponing meetings, and then you're never going to meet with them, and so you're never going to have to face them. So we decided that we needed to force a meeting. And the way that we did that is he had his offices on the very top floor of one of the skyscrapers in downtown Los Angeles. And so we organized the churches of the security guards, which were African American churches, to come down and to hold a gospel prayer meeting on the ground floor. And they did this during the high holidays. Now, the high holidays in the Jewish context are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a week. It starts with Rosh Hashanah and ends with Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, and Rosh Hashanah is the New Year. And between Rosh Hashanah and the Day of Atonement, the understanding for conservative observant Jews like this man is that the book of life is opened, and God looks at your deeds and writes your name in the book of life or not. You get a new chance to get your name written in the book of life every high holidays, excuse me. And so we wanted to do this during the high holy days. And so we did that. There were a number of black churches that came out and held a gospel prayer meeting on the ground floor of this building, asking for a meeting with this man. And, it was a wonderful, wild gospel prayer meeting, and all the tenants came out, and people were joining in and watching. And, of course, they called the police. And the police came, and they decided that they would wait until the meeting was over before they would talk to us about leaving. But, of course, they didn't understand gospel prayer meetings. It could be days before the meeting would be over. So they were waiting. And so, first of all, they go up. They really didn't understand. They go up to a black pastor that seems to be leading, and they try to pull him aside, and then an elderly woman an elderly sister takes up the leadership, and then an 11-year-old, when they go to talk to her, takes up the leadership. And so this thing is not going to end. And so finally the owner upstairs says that he will meet with the black clergy. He has no particular allegiance to anything the black clergy might say. He has no connection with them, but the rabbis the whole time have been waiting around the corner. And they have been waiting with apples and honey, which is what you give people on Rosh Hashanah. It's a New Year's gift. And so they have a little basket with apples and honey in it. And when the black pastors go up, they step aside and let the rabbis in. And the rabbis have a really deep conversation with him about what the Torah says about how you should treat your workers. And they say they're going to come back at the end of the week and see what he's decided. Well, during that week, he decides on to go with responsible contracting and to try to influence everyone he knows at the Building and Managers Association, which he does. So the Building Managers and Association makes a commitment to responsible contracting. That's what I call rainbow interfaith collaboration, because everyone brought what they could bring best from their own religious faith. Piles coins a term that she calls interspiritual solidarity, which I think is referring to this kind of rainbow work, although she's not very specific about it. But I wanted to share that term with you because she specifically created it to include people that are spiritual and not religious, some of the more modern versions of spirituality that are becoming common. So hope this was useful.